The great hall buzzed with its usual lunchtime chatter, the clatter of the utensils on the plates imitating with lively conversation. You sat beside Draco at the Slytherin table, your elbows brushing against each other's as you leaned towards him to make a sarcastic remark about one of your classmates. It had been like this for many years now. Sharp quips, late nights sneaking around Hogwarts, and endless arguments that never seemed to escalate into real fights. "You're ridiculous," you teased, smirking as Draco rolled his eyes at something you had said. "I'm not ridiculous, I'm logical," he replied coolly, though the ghost of a smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, which is why I can spot your terrible taste in friends from a mile away. You nudged him playfully, trying not to react in the way that his arm lingered against yours. "Oh, come on. Just because I talk to people outside Slytherin doesn't mean they're terrible people." "No, but Cedric Diggory certainly qualifies as such," Draco said flatly, his sharp grey eyes flickering to the Hufflepuff table. Cedric stood there laughing with a group of his friends, his easy confidence radiating across the room. He followed Draco's gaze and raised an eyebrow. "Cedric? What did he ever do to you?" "Besides existing," Draco sneered, taking a sip of pumpkin juice. "He's too perfect. Nobody is that perfect, Wyan. It's suspicious." You chuckled, not taking his words too seriously. "You're so dramatic, Malfoy. Maybe he's genuinely a good person." He looked at you, then his eyes narrowed. "You're defending him now? Planning on becoming best mates with him, are you?" "Jealous, are you?" you countered, smirking as Draco stiffened so slightly at your tone. "I just don't get it," he said tensely, though his grip tightened on his goblet. You leaned back, feigning nonchalance, as your heart raced a little bit, the tension crackling between the two of you. It was always like this, your banter, flirting, on the edge of something more. Something dangerous. You weren't sure when the line between friendship and whatever this was had started to blur, but you weren't brave enough to test it outright. Unbeknownst to you, someone was walking towards the Slytherin table. "Wyan?" You blinked and turned, surprised to see Cedric Diggory standing there, his easy smile directed right at you. "Oh, hey Cedric," you said, smiling back out of the corner of your eye you had caught Draco stiffening beside you, his eyes narrowing to slits. "Do you have a minute?" Cedric asked, glancing briefly at Draco, but mostly focusing on you. Draco made a unimpressed sound long enough for Cedric to hear. You shot Draco a look before turning back to Cedric. Yeah, sure." Cedric motioned for you to step aside, and you followed him, a few feet away from the table, feeling Draco's eyes burning into the back of your head the entire time. What's up?" you asked, curious. Cedric rubbed the back of his neck, his usual confidence dimmed ever so slightly. He seemed to search for the right words. "Look, Ryan, I know we don't talk much, but I've always admired you. You're funny, kind, and honestly brilliant." You blinked, a bit caught off guard. "Oh, thank you?" He smiled at that easy charm of his. It was working like magic. "Anyways, I was wondering if you'd like to go to Hogsmeade with me next weekend, just the two of us." It took you a moment to process his words. Your brain was stuck on the fact that Cedric Diggory had just asked you out. But before you could answer, a familiar drawling voice interrupted. "They're busy." You turned, started to see Draco standing a few feet away, his arms crossed and his expression was colder than the winter night. "Malfoy," you hissed, but he ignored you. His piercing gaze was fixed on Cedric. Cedric, to his credit, only looked mildly surprised. "I wasn't talking to you, Draco." "And yet here I am," Draco retorted smoothly, stepping closer. "Wyan doesn't have time for your little outings, Diggory. They're far too busy with—" "Draco!" you snapped, cutting him off. "What are you doing?" He glanced at you, his expression briefly flickering to something you couldn't quite place, something raw and vulnerable, but it's gone as quickly as it came. saving you from a terrible mistake. Are you serious right now? You asked, confused. When? Cedric said gently. His tone was a sharp contrast to Draco's icy one. You don't have to answer now, just, think about it, okay? You nodded mutely, watching as Cedric gave Draco a polite yet pointed nod before walking back to his table. The tension between you and Draco was palatable as you turned to him. What the hell was that? You demanded, crossing your arms. Draco didn't flinch under your glare, though his jaw tightened. I was doing you a favor. A favor? You repeated, your voice rising. By embarrassing me in front of Cedric? Embarrassing you? He echoed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Sorry, I'm the only one here who can see through his annoyingly perfect act. He's not good enough for you. And you are? The words slipped out before you could stop them, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Draco's mask faltered, his confidence cracking just slightly. What's that supposed to mean? You know what it means, Draco, you said quietly, stepping closer to him. You act like you own me, but the second things get rare, you shut down. Maybe you're scared, or maybe you just don't care, but either way, you don't get to decide who's good enough for me. He stared at you, his usual confidence and arrogance stripped away, leaving only a boy who didn't know how to respond. Ryan, save it, you interrupted, shaking your head. I need some air. Without waiting for his reply, you turned and walked out the great hall, leaving Draco standing there, his fists clenched at his sides. The Slytherin common room was abuzz, with energy filled with students celebrating Merlin knew what. The firelight danced against the walls, and the chatter blended with the faint music someone had charmed to play softly in the background. You sat on one of the plush green couches, tapping your foot as you scanned the room. Draco Malfoy had been avoiding you for weeks now, and you were getting rather tired of it. The incident in the Great Hall still lingered in your mind the moment Cedric had asked you out. Draco had to interfere. After that day, he'd grown distant. His biting remarks traded for silence, his presence near you always fleeting. You tried cornering him during halls, during classes, even in meals, but he just always managed to slip away with some excuse or another. Tonight, though, he wasn't going anywhere. Finally, you spotted him near the far wall, leaning against a bookshelf with a drink in hand. He was talking to Blaze, though his replies seemed tense and distracted. His gaze flickered briefly towards you, and the moment your eyes met, he turned away sharply. Your frustration bubbled over. Enough was enough. You couldn't believe how he was acting. You stood up abruptly, ignoring Pansy's questioning glance as you marched across the room without a word. You grabbed Draco's wrist and tugged him away from Blaze mid-sentence. Boy! Draco started, startled, but you shot him a sharp look and that silenced him. We're talking, you said firmly, steering him down the corridor. He resisted slightly, but you were too determined to let go. When? What are you? Before he could even protest, you yanked the nearest door open, a small supply closet tucked away from the main party, then dragged him inside, shutting the door behind you. You whirled him to face you, your hand still gripping his wrist. All right, Malfoy, spill, you said breathless, but was late. Before he could protest further, you yanked him into the nearest door, a small supply closet tucked away from the main party, and dragged him inside, shutting the door behind you. You whirled around to face him, your hand still gripping his wrist. All right, Malfoy, spill, you said, absolutely breathless. Draco frowned, yanking his hand free. What exactly am I supposed to spill? You've gone mad. You've been avoiding me for weeks, you snap. And don't even try to deny it, I'm not an idiot. He crossed his arms, leaning back against the door with his signature scowl. Maybe I just needed some space. You rolled your eyes. Oh, come on. Space from what? We were fine, Draco. Then Cedric asked me out, and suddenly you're acting like I don't even exist anymore. At the mention of Cedric, Draco's jaw tightened and he looked away. His eyes narrowed. There it is. You're jealous, aren't you? You said. Don't be ridiculous, he said coldly, though the flicker of emotion in his gray eyes betrayed him. Oh, you're such a coward, you shot back, your voice raising. You act all high and mighty, like no one's good enough for me, but the second you're actually called out on it, you run. You don't get to do that, Draco. He glared at you, his defenses clearly crumbling. And what? What do you want me to say, YN? That I can't stand the thought of you with someone else? That every time I see Diggory smiling at you, I want to hex him into next week? That I'm terrified of ruining everything by saying how I actually feel? His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and your breath hitched. For a moment, neither of you actually spoke, just sat there. The air was thick with tension that had been simmering between the two of you for years. Then before you could really even think twice, you grabbed the front of his shirt and yanked him forward, crashing your lips against his own. Draco froze, his sharp intake of breath and an audible gasp in the quiet closet was the only sound. For one antagonizing moment, you thought he might pull away. But then he was kissing you. He was kissing you back. His hands were tangling in your hair as he pressed you against the wall. It was frantic, almost desperate. The years of unspoken feelings and heaved glances, his lips moved against yours with a ferocity that made your knees weak. You clung to him as if letting go would shatter the moment entirely. When you finally broke apart, gasping for air, Draco's forehead rested against your own, his eyes searching yours, filled with something raw and vulnerable. You have no idea how long I've wanted to do that, he admitted. His voice was barely above a whisper. He let out a breathless laugh, your hand still clutching his shirt. You're an idiot. You know that? He smirked faintly, though his usual arrogance was tempered by his softness in his gaze. Probably, but I think you're stuck with me anyway. You smiled, your frustration melting away as you leaned into him. Good. Draco let out a long chuckle, his fingers brushing against a strand of hair at your face. So, this mean Diggory's out the picture? You roll your eyes, though your lips twitched in amusement. I didn't even say yes to him, you prat. The relief in Draco's expression was palatable, though he tried to play it off with a shrug. Well, of course you didn't. Who'd want him when you could have me? You groaned, shoving him lightly, though you couldn't help but hide your smile. There's the map boy I know. He grinned, but the humor faded as his gaze turned serious. He began. His voice was soft. I apologize for avoiding you. I just didn't know how to handle it. You're my best friend, and I was scared of losing that, of losing you. Your heart ached at his honesty. You reached up to cup his cheek. You're not losing me, Draco. If anything, you've just made sure I'm not going anywhere. His eyes softened and he leaned into your touch. You really mean that? You smiled, thumb brushing against his cheekbone. Yes, you absolute dolt. He huffed a quiet laugh, his hand settling on your waist as if afraid to let go. Good, because you're stuck with me now. You smirked, looping your arms around his neck. That doesn't sound too bad. The distant sound of laughter and music reminded you of the world outside the closet. But for now, you didn't care. In that moment, you just wanted to stay there. Draco kissed you again, slower this time, as if savoring every second, and for the first time in weeks, everything felt right. You pulled back from the kiss again. The air between the two of you was thick with unspoken words. Draco was looking at you like he was seeing you for the first time, his fingers absentmindedly tracing circles on your waist. You weren't sure whether that dizzy feeling in your chest was from the kiss of the intensity of his gaze. What? You asked softly, The vulnerability in your own voice surprised you. Draco hesitated for a moment, his usual bravado replaced by something quieter and more genuine. I'm not exactly an expert in this, he admitted, vaguely between the two of you gesturing. But if you're willing to put up with my less than gentle moods and my massive ego, I'd like to figure it out together. You laughed softly, leaning your head against his chest, listening to the rapid thump of his heartbeat. I've already put up with you this long. What's a bit longer? His arms tightened around you slightly, but for a moment you felt the full weight of the tension that existed between the two of you for years lift. But, you added with a mischievous glint in your eyes, you're telling Cedric the news. I'm not explaining this one to him. Draco groaned dramatically, dropping his head against the back of the wall. What? Why me? He's your admirer. You're the one who intervened in the first place. He shot back, grinning. His lips curved into a sly smile, but his confidence creeped back up. Fine. Only because I want to see his face when I tell him you're mine. The possessiveness in his tone sent a chill through you, though you tried to cover it with an eye roll. Don't push your luck, Malfoy, you warned, pushing him down for another kiss. For once in a very long time, he didn't have a comeback.